Yeah, looks like we're live now, David. We're live. So like I say, I just want to close up a couple of my social media pages here, make sure they're all, because I can't rely on YouTube. Oh, that's another thing. Actually, David, have you heard about, I've got a video coming out. I got it uploaded for, I think it's Monday, but
Yeah.
you've probably already heard about it too. But finally, that Susan Wadziki, I believe her last name is, or whatever, the CEO, she actually admitted during a podcast on New York Times that they actually do actively suppress content creators, independent content creators, and bump up like basically MSM outlets. Did you hear about that yet?
I didn't hear about that, but
okay, yeah.
I heard her say that they suppress people who disagree with the mainstream COVID stuff. And okay, but there's a lot of different mainstream COVID information right now. But I didn't hear this. I didn't hear this other one.
Yeah, no, well, actually, yeah, that's the thing. And, we've all speculated for quite some time now, and, the evidence has been there, but I, like a lot of people, my credibility and my reputation means a lot. So I don't want to say anything that I don't know to be true.
Right.
But to finally hear it, and I mean, James O'Keefe with the Veritas, and you've seen some of the people within the organizations that have admitted to kind of doing nefarious things, but how far is it cultural? Well, actually, like if the CEO is standing she's on the stage or doing a podcast on New York Times, and she literally admitted that they do that, because they believe that they are the trusted sources, which to me is just
right.
That's editorializing. But anyways, forget about that. We'll talk about
another time.
Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to. I'm sure it's going to take a little bit of time. That's actually why I was going with that, because it's going to take a little time for people to start streaming into the stream here, because I have to put out the notification myself. But for those few that are here, I guess there's a few already now. But I just wanted to mention that I've been anxiously waiting to have this conversation with David. And as you can see, it's called what I've called it Statism. Millennials find new faith in an old idea, and it's something that definitely hits. Yeah. Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Well, it was your idea, so I'm going to credit you with the idea, and I just come up with the title per se. So a little joint venture there, I guess. But what I like about it is the fact that obviously I have 2 millennial age sons myself, and I recognize there are a lot of millennials out there who do seem to have a lack of understanding or guidance or some kind of moral compass or anything. So they're constantly striving and trying to find ways. It's like they're trying to reinvent the wheel all over. And I'm all for adopting new ways of thinking about things, but it's like some of this work has already been done. You might want to build on some of them foundations in the past rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But anyways, that's the kind of the conversation that we're looking forward to, that I've been looking forward to having with you today. And I'm really excited to hear what you're going to bring to the table, because I know that your background is predominantly from the objectivist camp. Yeah. So actually, if you want to even take the time right now, just kind of give a little bit of a backgrounder for the people who aren't familiar with you, with my channel, and kind of let them know who you are, what you stand for, and what has piqued your curiosity in terms of this particular topic.
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, now I identify as an objectivist or a student of objectivism, but that's only been for about the past year and a half. And actually my longer term background is I was one of these people, right? So when I'm so interested in millennials and their faith in the state, because that's how I was 3, 5, 10 years ago. And so I really feel when I talk about this, it's as if I'm a religious convert, right? Like as if not to objectivism, but away from a religion, right? Like I broke out of the church or something like that. It really feels like that. That's been my experience, and my experience with the peers I've, let's call it, left behind. And so just a little more on that. My background's in engineering. I went to university like many millennials do. I felt I should, right? I didn't think about it. I was just kind of ushered that way. And I never thought much about politics, but I had taken for granted, basically the base assumption is if I care about people, I want the government to take care of them, right? Like that was good. If I'm good, I want to take care of people, but I don't want to take care of people. I want the government to take care of people. Right. And then I had some mental health issues when I graduated university, and I really thought about first principles. How do I live my own best life? And I couldn't help but see the parallels like for broader society, which led me to kind of libertarian ideas. And I just got so interested in fundamentally, how do I live a good life? And then how do we organize society around those principles? And so it was a very different path than many people I've seen, how they've become like libertarian or objectivist. But to me, it's like any psychological best principles, if you abstract them out, it's take responsibility for yourself. You can't force anyone to do anything. You can't force someone to agree with you. You can't force someone to do something. And so it's how do we bring those principles out to everyone? And then my experience has been absolute like disconnection from my peers, right? I'm a heathen because I disagree with their political views. And it's really they get so upset because their views aren't actually based in reason. They just believe these things because they believe them. And so that's why it's so similar to religion, right? Because they just don't have an actual grounding. And so when you challenge any of the surface level stuff, one of the biggest blowups was around the plastic ban. Should Justin Trudeau ban plastic straws? And I'm a scum of the earth for thinking no. And they're all like, great little altruists or whatever. So that's kind of my background. And why I'm so interested in it is it's because to me, the opposite is also true, that the statism is a big source of the mental health crisis, right? These things, it goes the other way as well. People don't take responsibility for themselves. People don't feel like they have control of their own lives, and then they feel completely out of control. So I think it's such an important issue to prevent more and more young people and future generations as well from having the same issues that many people my age have.
Yeah, actually, that's a great explanation, and it really resonates with me because as someone that I'm not sure if you've listened to some of my streams before when I've talked about my own personal growth in terms of I come from a very religious family myself, and it was a lot of, now there were great morals, right, that were taught right from the teachings of the Bible, but there was so many of those contradictions, and that was always the difficult part for me as a child, was the nonstop contradictions, because some of the premises sound great, the principles sounded great, like don't hit, like basically that's why I even libertarianism appealed to me, right? Because it's kind of along the same line in terms of the morality or ethics of it all. But it was the contradictions. It was like, how can we square this, especially when you're trying to teach people? And I think what I learned growing up in terms of how it's conversely translated from old world religions or Christianity or Judaism or Islam or whatever type of, to statism. So they've taken the dogma, right, the mysticism, and basically translated it, and just instead of claiming this entity that's external to the world, aka God, that actually tell you the truth, actually, as long as the ethics are universal or are actually much more aligned with my own ethics, but because they translate that into the state and place that in, and their faith in real human beings. Well, now we know that now there's no such thing as any kind of a universal, because not everybody, we're all fallible human beings. Like a concept such as God or a concept such as math, right? Well, we can make it so that it's universal and objective and true. But government, it's an automatic contradiction, because government is basically, a monopoly of force of violence. And if you're not supposed to use preemptive force or violence, then it's a constant. So I get that. And to me, that's the part that I found most disturbing is that, what are the young people today? I'm kind of fortunate as a Gen Xer that I did have like the religious upbringing, and I seen this. Right. I had so many different things that I had to compare. Plus I have an inquisitive and inquiring mind, because so you have to kind of have that predisposition to begin with. But yes, when I look out there on the landscape today, now for my own children, obviously, they're probably better off than most because they've had me and they've watched me go through my own growth and learning experience, and they've adopted that themselves. But there's so many of their peers that, it's like they're walking around. They have no idea, no concept, especially with moral relativism, postmodernism. They're basically taught and subjectivism, where it's basically they're not even given any baseline premise in terms of what is like considered a universal or an ideal in terms of morals and ethics. And so they're constantly looking for where they can find these ideals. And the unfortunate thing is now religion has been so hammered, and I'm not saying I'm in defense of religion per se, because I realize that comes with some serious negative connotations as well, right? Because you're still back into the mystic world. But I do realize that without something to fill that void, that vacuum, the more that the younger people are turning and pivoting towards the state, I see is definitely going to be detrimental, especially for Western societies going forward. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have quite a few thoughts, actually. So first, I'll say that I don't know if I would agree with the like objective good of God, but that's a whole other conversation, right? That's But
Well,
I think
actually, before you even go on that, when I use the term God, just for clarification purpose, that's the terminology that's been used throughout past, whether it was metaphorical.
like
I mean it as an ideal, right? That's really all at the end of the day. What I mean is ideal. But anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
And I mean, there's some there is some issues with a vague ideal, right? And not specifying it, which is I was very much in this camp as well, of still really valuing the idea of God and stuff. And it's actually a relatively recent conversation that I had that kind of switched my thinking about religion more broadly. But I want to highlight that at least religions did have some ideal, right? And so we went from what's essentially intrinsicism, some people who have access to God know the good, right? To complete subjectivism, which I think is worse, where it's like whoever is in charge is right. And it's just the group who picks the person decides, right? So it's like it's almost like a worse form of subjectivism. And I found it, at least in my circles, I was basically a hedonist as well. So it's like in your personal life, you're personally subjectivist. And then in society, you let someone else be the subjectivist for society, right? But something that's really interesting to think about, I've not read this book yet, but there's a book by an objectivist philosopher, Leonard Peikoff, called The Dim Hypothesis. And so he basically... So basically the idea is like religion misintegrated people, right? It didn't, because there were a lot of contradictions. So they're trying to...
You just cut out there a little bit there, David. You're paused there for some reason. Darn internet connections. There, you're back now.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all good. It's all good. No worries.
So religion misintegrates people because there's a lot of contradictions and whatnot, right? And then what's happened, I think millennials are the first generation to be raised without religion largely, right? I was not raised with any religion, basically. And so I had no values. I was raised without values, and I literally looked to TV and I looked to society at large to get values. And so, in addition, there's arguments that like the prevailing philosophies actually try and disintegrate people's minds, right? They argue that we can't know these answers. At least before, religion was saying we can, and here's our answer, and it's, not quite right, but there's something, and it helps people live a mostly good life, right? They're not going to lead the best life possible, which is what we want for ourselves and for everyone else. But now we're told the kind of overreaction to that is, well, we can't know any moral answers, right? And so if that's what you're told, then of course, your value is there are no values. And I'm attached to the idea that there are no values. And it's been so interesting to try and talk to people and talk them through that and have them understand that doesn't even make a little bit of sense, right? I say, like, if you try to raise a kid, you're going to just tell that kid, oh no, do whatever you want. There's no good. Yeah. But they don't think of it that way. And so everyone manages to kind of have specific boxes of what they think they can value and what they can't value, or what has values and what doesn't have values. And so I really think that the main thing is that millennials are the first ones to largely be raised without religion. But, a friend of mine made an argument that that's actually progress, because if everyone's kind of convinced into a misintegration very heavily, it's a lot harder to break out of that, right? Whereas if you're kind of just left completely in chaos, maybe you'll find order more easily. So I don't know how much I agree with that, but that definitely was a light bulb and took me away. I was still quite pro-religion until about 8 to 10 months ago, and this argument resonated with me well. But I think and so I don't blame my friends explicitly, right? They want to latch on to something, and there is this idea that, well, obviously, if the average person is good and people think this, then that is what's good. But there's no real basis in moral principles at all, because they've been tossed out. The very idea of moral absolutes was tossed out with religion.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, there's two things I just rolling off the top of my head right now based on what you're saying there. Actually, it was a little bit when you were started out earlier on about the millennials. But first, what I wanted to ask you, actually, because I meant to ask this earlier on, is actually how old are you? Because you mentioned you're a millennial. So how old are you?
I'm 28.
Oh, okay, perfect, excellent. Actually, so that's great. So you're actually right in that age range that you're perfect. So, and what I was kind of getting to, what you were alluding to when you first started talking with it, with the millennials and stuff, and in terms of religion and altruism, that is actually one of the things that, and it was objectivism. So, when I started down the whole thing in terms of learning about philosophical concepts in terms of libertarianism stuff, because to me it wasn't the politics. The politics was like, I feel dirty even talking politically, to be honest with you. But it was the philosophical underpinnings, like I say, in the pursuit of knowledge and truth. And so to me, but the one thing, it took objectivism. So even after I had spent years, basically inundating myself with a massive amount of literature and historical information and pertaining classical liberalism or libertarianism and all these things, and Mises and Rothbard, and even going to the classical liberals like Adam Smith and Locke. And so go through all that process, and I understood the concepts, and I got a better knowledge of that. But it wasn't until I learned of Ayn Rand's objectivism, and it was like an unbelievable light bulb moment for me, which really defines so much in terms of, because it feels good. Like when you're told in religion that you should be altruistic and sacrifice yourself for others, it sounds such a, that says that you're going to be, what you have such compassion and love in your heart. Like that's what you're told, right? That you'd be willing to, suppress your own, happiness, needs, wants, desires, and all those, and sacrifice them for someone else. Now, to me, that sounds good as a concept. And I think why that appeals to a lot of people, especially when you're younger, is because in your own personal family setting, subjectively, like depending on whichever ones that you care for, you will probably do that. Like I know for myself, I will for sure sacrifice some things of myself to benefit my children, my sons in some way. But once again, if that's taught as a concept and you're not taught to at least be subjective, or at least hold the people that you're going to show any form of altruism towards, if you're not going to hold a particular standard, and that's what Ayn Rand said is literally to be blind. That's altruism, and the way it was taught throughout Christianity is like blind altruism. So what? I can't just be expected, and that was, like I say, the light bulb moments. Yeah, why would I ever be expected to yield or bow the things that I hold near and dear for someone else? I have no idea what their intentions, what their morality, what their ethics entail. So to be just willing to sacrifice myself for anyone, or this concept of the greater good, when I don't know what is this greater good, right? There's people that are good most of the times. There's people good that are bad most of the times. And I mean, there's so many iterations of that. What does it mean? It was this thing. And when she explained about the self-esteem, that was the thing. And when you think about it, just use that concept of self-esteem and proper self-esteem and selfishness, not the kind of selfishness that we're taught is, oh, it's bad, just right. But when she explains it, it gives you that concept in your mind is that, no, you should have enough self-esteem. And I think that eliminates the potential for that slave psychology where you'll conform to basically anyone, right? And subject yourself to the whims to some really very nefarious people who just know how to use the language to manipulate you. If you don't have that self-esteem, if you lack that self-esteem, which does represent a lot of people who are blind altruists that come from the religious faith, and that's probably what did turn a lot of the younger people off from that, is that it's like, no, I'm not willing to do that. They're learning new concepts. So I'm totally on board with the young millennials today rejecting that kind of blind altruism. I definitely am completely on board with that. And I think it's very important for young people or anyone to have self-esteem. But then I always worry too, right? And this is the part where Ayn Rand starts to get the critique is, but you can also take that to an extreme too, right? And this is the area where libertarianism and objectivism, if you combine both of them, that's, to me, it's like, I don't think I would have ever been able to get to the place in my mind that I'm at today without hearing perspectives from not just the libertarianism, but objectivist camp too, is because if you combine the principles espoused and contained within both of these philosophical understandings in regards of human cooperation in the social or economic realm, the NAP covers a lot of the, in terms of like, not using preemptive force and violence against people. So it's a great way as a baseline measure, to gauge what is an ethical behavior in terms of social or economic engagements. But like I say, nothing in libertarianism taught you to have that kind of self-esteem that will prevent your mind from subjecting itself to the whims of others. And that was something that Ayn Rand brought to the table and explained it so articulately in so many ways that I thought it was just so important. And that is something that young people need to have, is that healthy self-esteem in some way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Self-esteem is a huge issue, right? And I think, that's the link between like statists want people without self-esteem, and people without self-esteem want statism, right?
Yeah.
So one thing that Tim Moen and I have talked about quite a lot is that, yeah, libertarian ideals have a lot of what not to do, right? But people need something to aim at, right? And that's what religion played, and that's objectivism holds. Here is what is good. Here is what is worth aiming at. And so without getting into like the differences between those two, libertarianism versus objectivism, I think that is what's so hugely valuable, right? And I also think, Ayn Rand rejects altruism outright, right? So the whole idea is that it's altruism by definition is a sacrifice of a higher value for a lower value. And so people view it incorrectly, which is why, they say, well, I'd sacrifice for my son. Like maybe I'd literally die for him. But that's because your son is a higher value to you than yourself, right? And that can be rational for a loved one, for a child, right? And so people then like that whole, like that deep love you have for real values gets kind of warped. It's interesting. I was drawn towards Buddhism as my, like, when I left the state, let's say, I was drawn towards Buddhism. I'm rereading a Buddhist book now and seeing how differently I view it than when I did originally read it. And it's because it preached a lot of the same altruistic goals for society, but it was basically, well, this is how you reach perfection, right? So it was still kind of more guided towards the individual in a bizarre way. But bringing it back to like millennials broadly, they've rejected the altruistic. I said they're hedonists. Let's call it hedonists in the sheets and subjectivists in the streets, because they view like, well, no, I shouldn't sacrifice myself. I shouldn't do all of these things, but society still should, right? So they want to vote to support those things. And so, for example, with the plastic ban, I mentioned how that was like a falling out I had when I said, I don't think this is right. Meanwhile, I took all of the like doctrines of the culture seriously. I became a vegetarian out of anxiety for damaging animals. I had I produced less garbage than anyone I knew, right? And so I actually was the ideal in their view, but then I just didn't think that should be forced upon other people. But none of them actually did these things themselves, right? And it really comes down to, it's the same fundamental guilt that like religions give you, like, this is what morality is, and you're not good enough to do it yourself. So we should force you to do it. And that's what statism is, right? It's, oh, I should do these things, right? I should help poor people. But I'm not willing to, I don't have the responsibility to act on my own values. So I'm just going to make sure that they take my money and do the right thing with it, because I can't do it myself. And so there's often, in a few different Ayn Rand essays, she kind of highlights actually that she calls it Attila and the Witch Doctor, and that often, like, when there's force, there's more mysticism, because like people know they can't uphold these ideals, so force should be used. And the whole idea is, if, like, what I like about the idea of an objective good is it's only good if you realize why it's good, essentially. Like, that's not the full, but if something's intrinsically good, it's still good even if you're forced to do it, right? So if it's good to go to church, even if you're dragged there by a gun, it's still good for you. It's good for your soul, right? That's an extreme example, but that's the fundamental premise, right? So if it's good to recycle, it's good if you go to jail for not recycling, right? Because it's just, it doesn't matter if you hate it and if you're miserable, as long as you do it. And so that's why, and that's what most of my peers believe, which is completely a holdover from religion in my understanding of it.
Yeah. Well, to me, when it comes to that stuff, it always should come down to, at the end of the day, when people are placed in these circumstance or situation, to me, the most important thing would do is the people that, because you never know what the goals or intentions are, the people that that you aren't familiar with yourself. If you don't have personal knowledge of these people, then you don't know. So to me, it would be the test, their hypothesis or the premises is, are they at the very least leading by example? I mean, if they're coming at it from the status position, they're already showing an unwillingness to uphold themselves to these morals or ethics that they pretend to espouse. And that actually is something, once again, that perfectly correlates with some of the nefarious stuff that was done under the pretense of religion in the past. So you would have religious leaders, right? The ones that had ill intentions. I mean, think about it. How easy is it to subject a population than to teach them all to be good little conformists, right? To abide by, and if God says that you must, hand money over to the collection plate, right? And yet you're the one that, if you're not holding yourself to the exact same standard, actually that places you in the perfect position to be the ruler and to impose yourself on those people, because you've taught them, psychologically, you've taught them to be good little conformists or serfs or slaves or subjects. And to me, that's what they've done today. So the old world religion, to me, that's what it is they realized that when religion was dying off, we don't have that power over the mind, because ultimately that's what it is. It's power over the mind, right? And it's like when religion's dying off, it's a fad and it's no longer conducive with what we want. Well, we have to pivot towards somewhere else. And what was the entity that replaced religiosity and God? Well, it was the state, right? And the state gave them another example where they can teach the masses, right, to be good little conformists, compliant, and uphold themselves to be perfectly ethical in every way, or at least that's how they put forth. But yet they stand in these positions, right? They're not held to that exact standard. So to me, as for a young person today, and that's the thing with objectivism, what I love about it is you don't have to listen to Bennett. You don't have to listen to David. None of it. If you think critically about the issues and you use objective logic, all you would have to do, and if you actually understand, that's the other aspect of this too, and I've mentioned this many times, is clarity of language. It gives you clarity of mind and clarity of thought. Yeah. Because the language is so massively manipulated today, to me, I constantly tell people all the time, especially if I'm going to get into a debate or discussion, is okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to agree to the defined terms because if you're going to come up with your own definitions of words and I'm allowed to come up with, then we're basically talking past each other. We have to at least be willing to, just like we were going to sit down and play a board game together or a game of cards, we have to at least accept that we're going to, yield to the exact same rules. You don't get different rules and I get different rules. We have to yield to the exact same rules. That way we actually do hold ourselves to the exact same standard, which lacks in the state and it did lack in religion. And that is a problem that I think the millennials are going to have to come to terms to, which is why I'm kind of glad, at least as much as science is talked and bandied about, they use science today to beat people over the head once again. But because young people are at least being taught that scientific method matters, well, that is a way of objectively thinking. So at the very least, maybe at some point in time, maybe a lot of the folks of your age, of the millennials, when they get old enough to kind of come to terms with some of these understanding these concepts, I actually believe it or not, and I hate to use the term, but I have faith in the younger people today, because I think we do go through like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, humanity, but I think we do continually, and I'm not using this as a progressive, but I think we do progress, right? In some way in terms of our intellectual development. And I think right now in terms of humanity, we're kind of like this, we're at the adolescent stage. We're getting close to the point where we might be reaching maturity, right? And to me, the millennials in the information age and all this amazing knowledge that they have access to could be the leaders off into the future. But what I recognize, it's very incumbent on people like myself in the older generations of demographics, because we do understand some of those historical concepts that the younger people aren't privy with, like you're saying with religion, where I got some knowledge that I can bring to the table too. So for millennials in particular, and the Gen Zs coming up, is like I say, don't get too enamored with the concept of rejecting religiosity and pivoting but actually even question some of the new concepts you're being taught, because like I kind of alluded to, this is not the first rodeo where authoritarians use a means to subject your mind to give them power over you. So to me, it's like at least constantly be willing to question even some of the dominant narratives that you're hearing today. Like that's very important as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important. And one thing that comes to two like quick things come to mind is, you mentioned how we're just going back to, old patterns when we reject religion. And it's actually, we're going back to older and older patterns, right? What like statism is essentially a form of tribalism. And that's what Nazism was. And now we're just seeing further and further degradation into actual tribalism. And I think also one thing Ayn Rand says is if everyone's being asked to sacrifice, someone must be collecting sacrifices.
Exactly.
Right? Like, and in every in statism and in religions, the whole idea is no, everyone should sacrifice. And it's like, okay, but to who, to what? And like, to the state or to God, but like there's someone there collecting. But what you said about the importance of language and these sorts of things, I think is extremely important. And, you know, the most powerful thing about the state is the education system it controls. And so, and this goes back to like Leonard Peikoff's dim hypothesis, and that they're being taught to not even think properly, right? And so it's really hard for them to think through these issues when they're at a young age taught to not think through these issues. And it's been so surprising to me. Even before I was an objectivist, I was always very rational and very objective. I cared about the truth more than anything else, right? More than my own well-being. And people just denied that was possible. They denied that I could care about the truth more than other things. And as I've learned a systematic view of it, they still say that's impossible, right? And they still say, oh no, you can't not want to collect sacrifices. And it's really quite bizarre. But I think that's what they've been taught. And it's so amazing that you can stand as one person in a room of 40 and be told that you're the one who's indoctrinated for disagreeing. And so it's really just unfortunate. And so I don't think progress is inherent, right? I think you have to work and fight for it. And it doesn't take that many people, right? So human progress, I also have, let's call it faith that we will progress. And I'm often quite an optimist compared to other people, because I see the relationships I have. And it's more so in conversations like this or with one-on-one with friends. You know, when you're in a group of 10, everyone just wants to fit in. But when you can get people and have real conversations. But the thing that really alarms me is actually the split in young people's thinking. Because yes, they agree to the scientific method. I studied engineering, and everyone agrees that this is the right approach for material issues. But they refuse the possibility that the same approach can be taken to any issues of psychology, philosophy, morality. They just don't think it's possible. And I don't know how to break through to that, because to me, it always just didn't make sense, right? I say, like, we managed to land, like, you know, a penny-sized object on Mars or something perfectly, but we think we can't figure out how society works and what people aim at and what is good. And so it's unfortunate. And that's the biggest gap, I think. And those people think they're super smart too, right? Like, it's very much, I don't often call it like the elitist mentality or anything, but like, they have university educations. They're very intelligent about their fields, and they just take for granted. It's the same way nutrition is a mess, right? Everyone eats, so they think they know how to eat properly. Philosophy, everyone has one. Everyone lives a life, even if they've not thought about why. So everyone just thinks, oh, well, no, it's common knowledge, common sense. And common sense is just whatever the masses think, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, I was just what you're mentioning, I'm just going to run this by you real quick, because this is something that I've talked about this with other people in the past as well, but something that it's always driven me. So once again, I'm always the kind of person that tries to I kind of picture my intellectual or philosophical journey as if I had a jigsaw puzzle in front of me, and I'm trying to put it piece by piece together so that I can kind of look back and kind of get some kind of visual aspect of what the big picture is, not just tunnel vision, not just focusing on little things, but what's the big picture at the end of the day. And to me, that's why when I consider and contemplate, think about the history of what I learned about Christianity or religiosity, and I consider about the knowledge I've learned in regards to statism, and then I think about even in terms of economic system, like socialism or capitalism. The thing that seems to be so stark for me in terms of my mental understanding all these concepts is, I think why capitalism in particular seems to be very conducive for so many people for so many ways is the underpinnings of capitalism at the end of the day is competition, as far as I'm concerned, because really like you're constantly trying to improve. And even if it's not, because when I say competition, it's not just competition between you and the other person, but it might even be internal competition. So you're constantly trying to improve your state of mind so that you can improve on your product or your service or whatever you do. And that competition, what I've recognized always throughout history and even today, is competition raises and elevates. And because even if you're like, I'm not huge into like sports, like team sports, I'm more into individual type of sports or things or activities. But even in team sports or individual sports, even though it's competitive, because you understand in proper competition, or at least most people, no matter what age range or cohort you come from, proper competition, if you watch it, whether it's on TV or playing video games or whatever, is to be cordial and respectful of each other that you bring to the table. So like you could see two guys at the UFC beat the living crap at each other, but they recognize how much work and effort they put in to get to their bodies to the point where they are and their skills at that point. And no matter who wins or loses, that they go and they'll shake each other's hand. They might even go out for a beer afterwards, but what that does is that raises and elevates them. And each one of them are going to improve in some way, in some capacity. That to me is something that, and especially when you're younger, and I think it actually carries through to even in your later ages, because I find myself, I've always been very competition oriented. And in my younger years, actually that was that competition, that drive of competition that was kind of instilled in me. I don't know how it got, my dad was very much like that as well, but it was what actually like not forced me, but enticed me to want to learn something outside of what I was already taught. Oh, there's new knowledge that I can adopt that's actually makes me wiser, right? It makes me wiser, makes me smarter. Actually, I'm getting this much closer to the truth. So that is competition, because rather than being wrong, that's to me, to be incorrect, that's the guy that lost, right? To be correct is the guy that won. So competition based, and because humans are obviously right down to our DNA, to our core, that's how we survived as a species, right? Kind of really important. The reason why me and David are here today and other people aren't is because we outcompeted them genetically, physically, monetarily, whatever the hell it was, but we outcompeted. So to me, that's the beautiful thing about, if you bring some of the aspects of morality, like I say, sure, you can get rid of the subjective aspects of religiosity, but morality, universalize that some way. I think Stephen Molyneux, the UPB, and Ayn Rand's objectivism, they've both kind of worked off of and built a lot of their premises off of Aristotle. I think they're getting to the point now where I believe, and even such people such as Brett Weinstein have said, like about the moral gene that they're trying to. So they're trying to even bring this to the scientific world where you can kind of make it objectively true, because in reality, we can prove that there is objective truth in terms of morals and ethics when you're using like rape, theft, murder. This can be objectively proved, and has, as far as I'm concerned, someone else could probably, question me on that and maybe try to prove me wrong. But it seems that you can't universalize, like Stephen Molyneux said, you can't universalize rape, because then you kind of eliminate it as a category. Because if we all want to be raped and we all want to rape, you kind of eliminate it as a category, right? But because we can universalize at least some aspects of ethics and morality, I think that is something that, like I say, the young people can use as a means to build and expand on. Like, so maybe instead of objectivism or UPB, maybe some of the millennials will come up with something that's basically perfected that, and it might be called something completely entirely, but it'll at least be the basis. And once you've created the base, like mathematics, what I love about mathematics is I don't have to rely on the subjectivity or someone else's opinion to figure out what 10 plus 10 is, or what 100 times 1,005. It's easy, because once I understand the formulation, and because it's universalized, then I can extrapolate from that point. And that to me is a major step going forward. And I think it's something that the millennials can take advantage, because we live in the information age and they can fill them noggins up with tremendous amount of knowledge. Is I think we may very well get to the point where you can say, no longer relying on mysticism. Of course, morality exists. Of course, ethics is something that we should hold dear as human beings, and this is how the formulation works. And once you get to that point, then I think you get the point, just like the scientific method, where there's a lot of people that might want to try to destroy it or break it or bring it down, but it's really hard, because you can prove objectively, right? Like the speed of light, just like if you can prove objectively what morality and ethics entails, I think that makes a winning strategy. And like I say, the millennials seem to be in a perfect position to be able to adopt that and build upon it.
Yeah. So I said I'm an optimist, but I'm not as optimistic about the millennials doing that. Right. I think I'm already looking at younger generations, because really what it comes down to is their mind active to this possibility? And, millennials, we talk about them as if they're children still, because they are largely, like, they're adult children, because like they've never taken actual responsibility for themselves. And so they've never taken responsibility for these issues. And so it's a question of when will they wake up writ large, right? And I don't know the answer, but I think, it's also important to focus on younger generations generally. I think that's one of the two fundamental things that came up while you were talking, is that they don't even think that that's possible. And that's, I've recently thought more about the theory of knowledge and why they think their brains can't work in this manner, right? Because I agree, I don't necessarily know that Ayn Rand's view of morality is perfect, but it's a really good start. And the whole premise, it's so different than the whole way she looks at morality is different than what young people view morality as, because they have a religious connotation of morality, right? It's commandments. It's what you shouldn't do. Whereas Ayn Rand's, I don't know Stefan Molyneux's view, but Ayn Rand's view is that it is about how to live the best life possible. How do you decide what the best life is for you? And so like the virtues and the values are not concrete bound. This is how you should think about your problems. And then you come up with the solution. And I mean, people also don't have the proper view of what it means to have an objective value. It doesn't mean you have to like all of the exact same things as I like. It means that I have to know why, based in reality, I like what I like and why it's worth pursuing. And I mean, going back to, I think this is directly related. The whole idea that they don't even think their brain can do this is directly related to the competition issue that you brought up, right? So capitalism is a system of competition, and that's why it's so good. But millennials don't want competition. Young people don't want competition because they don't want to lose. And they've been taught that losing is dreadful. And I mean, I think some of the like haters of the participant ribbon stuff, they're, you know, it's a bit overblown, but I remember hated getting those, right? Because it was like, I didn't earn this. I knew I didn't earn this, but they're still saying, oh, great job. No, but he won. I wanted to do something and that person did it better than me. And rather than me being told I'm fantastic still, no, this is a learning mechanism. How can I be better? And I think, again, the self-esteem is such a central thing here because, you know, the two UFC guys, if they have to be competing against themselves primarily, and then this is how they test how good they are. But if they attach their value to the win or the loss, you know, they're not going to have a beer with the guy. They're not going to grow and be good enough, right? Athletes, and I mean, I think it's a good symptom, let's say, that at least athletics are still upheld. Like heroic athletes are still like, it's one of the only realms where people still feel like, no, this guy worked hard and achieved this championship or whatever, right? Whereas that's not applied in many other realms. But I think, millennials don't like capitalism. Young people don't like capitalism overall because they don't want to compete. They don't want to feel like they have to earn their stuff because everyone is great. Everyone is equal. So everyone should get the same baseline. And they think, again, as if that will give them self-esteem. If everyone just had the same amount of things, everyone would feel good about themselves. But you feel good about yourself. What's valuable is creating value for your own life. That is the whole purpose of life. And I mean, I honestly, I started to mature at age 24 and everyone was telling me to start acting like an adult. And I looked around and none of them were acting like adults, right? Like, so I didn't understand. It was so difficult for me to understand these principles because they weren't living what they were preaching, but they thought they were. So it's quite confusing for, you know, a 24-year-old child to figure out how to live properly. And I think that's what it comes down to is I see so many of my peers still just asleep because they can be, right? And I think that is also, so it's kind of like, you know, we want to make sure people, you know, as few people as possible starve and die. But if you're just cushioned to the point where you don't have to think for yourself ever, which is, you know, a growing problem as society prospers, then you don't wake up, right? And you know, I've often said actually some of the people I liked talking to the most were people with mental health issues because at least they woke up, right? You get to some point where your mind goes, this shouldn't happen. This is wrong. And it really splits. And it's almost as if, you know, a friend of mine says depression is actually a good thing because it's like a fever. It's your body or your mind saying something is wrong. You need to fix this. We need to work on this. And I think the longer it takes, the more scary that is. And your mind just continues to evade and evade and evade. And so I think there's still a chance for millennials and I want to be optimistic, right? Like I have some friends who I know are good at their core and they have the right fundamental values, but they just don't know how to apply it properly. But it's also important to, you know, kind of leave them behind and they have, and in terms of my broader focus, it's like, younger people as well. And also the ones who want to, or who are more inclined to, will see what I'm doing and see what other people are doing and turn themselves on. Whereas I think it's the young people, that you need to focus on. And it's like, we're so obsessed with millennials because they're a big generation and they're important. And, quote, God forbid if they never wake up, en masse, because that's the trend we're going. Like, I think most of the trend of what we're going down now is caused by that, explicitly. But I think it's important to also, train the young people to use their mind, where millennials think that their mind isn't able to solve the important problems of morality and of their own life.
Yeah. Well, the problem with just making cooperation, a priority over competition, what I've noticed in my own personal life and any other anecdotal experience I've ever had with basically anyone I've ever interacted with, is you've destroyed the proper incentive. And actually, for those people, people say, oh, and the excuse I've heard, like even my sons, my two sons are 3 years apart. For my oldest son, the 3-year difference between when he graduated and my younger son, they were already heading in that direction. But my youngest son, when he graduated, it was with that where everyone, I think it was 28 students in his class, and everyone got something, right? And it's like,
right,
that's weird. But the problem now, that might sound, like I say, superficially, if you think about it just as a fleeting moment, that sounds good. Oh, what about poor little Johnny that's always at the back of the bus, right? Oh, you got to, but no, actually, because actually what you've taught Johnny, and not just Johnny, but everyone else, the other 27 people there, is no matter how much work or effort you put into whatever you do, and try to improve yourself in any way, it's not going to amount to anything, because you're still going to be treated under this pretense of where you're all just equal, right? To me, so it's like even little Johnny there, like, forget about how detrimental that is to the guy that, put in all that work, studied every night while everyone else was partying all weekend, right? So we can all, that example is easy. Most people will point to that, to the guy at the top. It's like, yeah, look at how much you're, destroying what that guy's working. But I'm actually thinking about poor little Johnny, the guy that finished there, because tell you the truth, even in my small little community, whether you're talking about a little rural place in New Brunswick where I live, or in a big metropolis urban center such as Toronto, every jurisdiction, every place you go, is because we have the ability to improve ourselves. We all, human beings, are susceptible to trying to improve. Now, it could be in a little, it could be a lot. There's going to be lots of ways you're going to measure that. But by allowing competition to flourish and to make that a priority over just blind cooperation, is now little Johnny can, like, he may never be the, like, let's just use wrestling. He might never be the best wrestler on the planet, but he can improve himself enough that he can be not last place, maybe not finish in third or fourth, maybe second, maybe he'll never be first, but he could always be able to improve his lot. So at the very least, competition helps not just the people that do put in the work, or maybe have some are predisposition because they have physical characteristics that maybe give them a leg up or an advantage over other people, maybe intellectually, but you're also incentivizing Johnny, or whoever the person that typically falls at the end of the line or the back of the bus. At least it gives them the idea that if they do put in more work, more effort, that they can improve their lot. To me, I think the worst thing you could ever do to me or to anyone is to place them in a position mentally or psychologically that, no matter what you do, you're just never going to be able to amount to anything. Like, what a terrible. I suppose that's probably a good place mentally why people pivot to somewhere else to constantly take care of them from cradle to grave, because you're basically telling them that they're not going to be able to improve their lot in life, and they're not going to need someone else to do it for them. And that's quite detrimental to everybody. Like, say, whether it's the person at the top or the person at the bottom. Yeah,
I mean, it's horribly detrimental, and I think it's not just that people feel like they can be equal; it's that people feel that it's not worth growing. Right. And so it's like, fundamentally, who should society be designed for? What principles should it be designed around? And it shouldn't be designed such that it optimizes for the least of us. It should allow the best of us to experience and accelerate the most, because that does help everyone. And it's also, I can't quote it exactly, but there's a often quoted thing from one of Ayn Rand's novels. It's like, show me your achievement so I know I can get mine, right? And like, that's what's inspirational. But it's, again, this notion that it's all about comparison, and that but he got 10 and I got 5, and I'm glad I got 5, but how dare he get 10? right? Like, no, if I have X amount of ability, I can achieve and I can feel good about achieving. And so it's not that, but there's this idea that if anyone reaches and grabs or like goes further, they shouldn't do that because it inherently makes people feel bad. It doesn't, unless we're taught to feel bad about that. Right. And I think that is what we're taught now, is that it's bad to look at someone who's achieved greatness. And so I mean, I'm trying to not be a randroid, but she says it's the hatred for the good for being the good. So it's not just this equal stuff, this equality narrative anymore. It's actually worse than that, is that we hate achievement because, like, fundamentally there's so little self-esteem that it makes us feel bad when someone else feels good and someone else is great. And it's really interesting because we talked about sports being kind of like an exception. Like, we're allowed to look up to Tom Brady and Sidney Crosby and stuff. But imagine if they took the same principles they have in respect to the intellectual and business realm to sports. Oh no, Usain Bolt, he's too tall. We have to shorten his legs. It's not fair. Or everyone gets to take steroids except Usain Bolt, right? And so it's just so illogical when you put it in a concrete form, but because it's intellectual, because it's hard to understand well, we think it's fine to tear down the people who are successful. And I mean, it also comes down to the fundamental non-knowledge, because I can't think of the proper word, of like the nature of value creation as such, right? So something on mind, like everyone's talking about, Jeff Bezos is going to be the first trillionaire in a few years or whatever. And as if that's like somehow inherently awful, but he's a trillionaire. People become billionaires because they gave me value and I paid them for the value, right? That is what happens. And that is, but there's this idea, well, shouldn't I be rich? Shouldn't I just be rich? Isn't money just something that happens so then I can live my life? And it's like, no, you have to produce and you have to create value for yourself and others. And at the fundamental level, we're told we can't even do that. We're told, no, the state has to take care of us and these sorts of things. And so I struggle to know how to get through to my young peers, because like my same age peers, right? Because my path was very much primarily focused about myself and, okay, what are the principles to live my best life? But they somehow don't see the connection. They can't make the connection of, a lot of one group in particular, they're more spiritually minded, self-improvement and these sorts of things, but they don't see how you have to be free to choose that yourself. And if someone forced you to do it, it's not valuable. But I don't know. It's
well, actually, David, let me just ask, because you're American, right?
No, I'm Canadian.
Oh, you are Canadian. Okay, but were you living in the U.S. or something?
I was in the U.S. for about 6 months or so.
Oh, okay. No, I thought you might have lived back and forth there. But anyways, my thing, so you, as a Canadian, you probably will recognize this yourself. If not, maybe you can disagree. But what I've always found, and especially talking about this competition and Canada, what kind of drives me nuts and it irks me, and it's something that I've known my whole life, and I hate the fact that my sons even recognize this. I wish it wasn't the case, because it's detrimental. But most people in Canada that have became successful, whether it's economically or just, whatever you want to say, socially, or became some kind of popular figure, in terms of news or movies or singing or whatever they aspire to be. It was the culture of the U.S. that was obviously very competition based. I mean, U.S. as a country, it went in basically 200 years. It went from basically a ragtag of 13 colonies to the most powerful, most dominant nation on the planet, like by a order of magnitude. Even though things have definitely started in the last 10 years with all the money printing, there's lots of countries around the world trying to catch up and stuff. But predominantly, like, we're talking like, second place is like way. It's like, oh, there's someone back there. Trust me, just give them a minute. But anyways. But what drives me nuts about Canada is the fact that I would like us to be able, and that's that competition is. I would like us, rather than Canadians constantly have to go to the US, if we ever want to achieve or attain any amount of success, it seems we always have to travel to the US because they have the culture of people that support that kind of competition, that kind of drive, that kind of success, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada, and to hear the way the media pundits or the political class in this country constantly finger wagging and talking down about the US when they're going through their issues, to me, the part that kind of drives me nuts is to try to act or claim as a basis of superiority when you got to at least recognize that most of the things in Canada, whether it's the things that we use tangibly or all the advancements in technology, or a lot of these things happen as a result of Canadians adopting, the knowledge that entrepreneurs or businesses or practices or methodologies or scientific discoveries from most of the Americans, or even if they were Canadians, even if sometimes, because sometimes you can point to a Canadian that achieved some great breakthrough in the medical, but chances are they probably traveled to the US. Even if they originally come up with the discovery, even if they come up with the discovery in Canada, it's like, hey, I come up with some really cool thing here. It's like nobody's listening, but it's like if they go to the US, like, oh, there they go. These people understand what. And to hear the way that the Canadian people, and that's, to me, that's because that's psychological, and that plays a massive effect on the population, which is what I think is terrible in terms of the contrast between Canada and the US. And the way the media talks about the US, okay, yeah, the US right now, yeah, it looks bad. Why? Because they're basically more public with their grievances, right? It's definitely much more public. So you're seeing the spectacle take place. Whereas in Canada, or even, maybe to a lesser degree, or maybe even more degree of the UK, is this constant claiming of superiority in some aspect, in some way, but everything's done behind the scenes, or just shut up. Don't talk about anything. Don't speak about anything. Don't disagree. And that way you can put on the facade that everything is going great. But in reality, I believe actually Canada and the US has a lot more that needs to be done in terms of getting us on the proper path to have a proper, healthy culture. Whereas the US, yeah, it looks bad right now, but they're trying their best. At least they're hammering out. They're trying now. I admit they still got a long way to go too. Like there's still a lot of the running to the perspective corners and nobody's talking. But I, at the very least, think that it's that competition derived psychology in the US that's so important. And to me, I want to emulate that success as a Canadian. And people get mad at me. It's like, well, if you like them so much, why don't you move there? It's not that. I mean, I would if I could. Actually, I probably would. But in reality, better than that is, why not make Canada as good? Why not build on that success and bring that here instead? To me, that's the same with when you're talking about immigration, right? It's like, why constantly drain all the brains from all these foreign countries? Why not make Syria great? Like, why not make Syria an awesome place that Syrian people can be to build their communities or their countries? Like, to me, that's what you do. And what I want to do in Canada is not that I hate Canadians or what Canada is entirely. It's just I recognize that there's a lot of room to grow, and I want to bring that to this country. And I get constantly insulted on a regular basis by my Canadians. And that's something I've noticed my whole life is, and actually it's bad, but I'll admit this, and I've admitted this in a couple streams in the past. It's like, I've actually had to, now I try to break free now as an adult, but there's been times in my life where I've started to attain some kind of success, and I got fearful of it because I was scared, because a lot of times in my life, if I have any success, there's usually someone around to try to tear me the hell down, because it's that psychology. It seems to be very dominant in the Canadian culture, is if you can't strive to attain the same kind of success, well, how you get equality? If you can't strive to that attainment, that success, then you bring me the hell down. And that, to me, it's like, I don't like living in a country where it's like that you're so fearful or resentful of other people's success and that you want to tear them down. To me, that just seems to be so destructive. And obviously it's bad for the older generations, but especially for people when we're getting to their age where they're trying to form some of these concepts, and to be constantly told that you must subject yourself and to others. And yeah, it's just terrible. It's terrible for the psychology. And I know it's very unhealthy for the young person when you're going through that transitional stage, because I'm still fighting it to this day. Right.
Yeah. And no, I think it's important to note that a lot of what we've been talking about is so like viscerally a problem in Canada, and the problems are different in the US, right? Yeah. But I probably know hundreds, if not, I know hundreds of people who've gone to Silicon Valley to work, right? I studied engineering at Waterloo. So many people go there, but they feel guilty. It's like, oh, I have to go there to just earn my dirty money, and eventually I'll come back to Canada, and that type of thing. But I think it's really two things that I think are really interesting about the US is, one, the same way that we tear down great people, we tear down a great country, right? The US had American exceptionalism, and that was terrible. How dare they think they're better than other countries, right?
Yeah.
And Canada has benefited. So I think we'd be much more socialist if we weren't bordering the US. And so we've benefited hugely. But it's also interesting, I've not thought of this before, but looking at the US, it's almost as if they're the country going through the mental health crisis, right? So there's such a mess because they're trying to figure it out how they got drawn so much towards statism, whereas in Canada and all the European countries, we're just still asleep, right? So it's like the US is an absolute mess right now, but that's actually a good thing. That shows their systems work properly because they're trending in the negative direction and people are being like, what the hell's going on? And it's interesting as well when you think of, I used to be very anti-patriotism. I'm not that way anymore, but it's because think of what, I don't know about you, but what I was taught in terms of how to be proud about being Canadian. It's like, oh, I'm proud we have public health care. It's like, that's not anything I did. That's not a value I've chosen. I'm saying I'm proud that we rob people to then give other people free stuff. Right. Yeah. But that's just the mentality in Canada. And it's so ingrained in the culture. And it's very bizarre. But people, I'm a heathen in my circles for bringing up these issues and for saying, no, I would like to live in the US. I want to be free. What state can I have the least taxes in? And where can I build my business? Right. But people think that's just absolutely terrible. And they think the whole idea of, it comes down to self-esteem issues and the idea that earning your own keep is somehow wrong and that you are entitled to some standard of living. You're entitled to some basic needs. And also they think that then, but that'll make you happy. If only you're not hungry, you're happy. And there's a difference between not dying and living. And at least, again, jumping back a bit, at least religion tried to teach people how to live. Whereas right now, all the state can teach you is how to not die. And so that's kind of a depressing note, but there are alternatives, but people are too scared to look at them, I think, because, it was terrifying to open my eyes up at 24. And I can't imagine if someone's 34 or 50. And I can't imagine if you're a country trying to do it, right? Like, not that there is an entity called country, but really look at the cultural norms and see, let's rethink this. That's like a extremely tough process.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're talking about Canada and like I say, in the whole terms, what is the number one thing I think I've ever heard? If you said to someone, describe Canadians in one word, like it'd be nice, right? Right, sure, or whatever. But to me, that's just such a baseless premise. I mean, like I say, it sounds good for a bumper sticker, maybe, but once again, it's these concepts that until you've actually delved down to them, and to me, that's this like. Is there no intellectual curiosity anymore? Because that to me is the part. Is like don't
these realms,
right? It doesn't seem to be, but to me, it's like that's the first thing I would think of. Okay, nice, but what does that mean? That means we're basically willing to put on a fake facade,
handshake,
right? Yeah, or even put on the facade that everything's okay when in reality it's not. To me, that's actually the wrong message to send. Like if you got shit going on, like if the house is burned down behind you, you're standing there, oh no, everything's great. Like that's actually going to be quite detrimental to you. Right? It's very important. And that's why, like I say, I do this comparison and contrast with Americans. And when we hear a lot of the pundits, especially in the CBC, constantly standing upon their little perches, right? Talking down about the Americans. Oh, look at how they're going. But like I say, that what it is, like you were saying, it's like watching two parents that are hammering out, what's a good way to raise their kids. Well, at least if they're having very vigorous, boisterous arguments, but it shows they actually care and there's some concern there. And they're at least trying to come to some semblance of idea and what path to go forward. Whereas, if you just pretend, oh no, everything's okay, like then nothing. How the hell would you ever expect to change anything if everyone just puts on a fake facade? And the only thing that you're concerned about is how other people perceive of you, whether it's true or not. Because to me, it's not a matter of just external perception. For it to be real, I have to acknowledge that myself internally, right? You might be able to convince someone on the outside, but you're not convincing yourself, which means you're not in the proper mindset to even be thinking critically about these things. And I think that's a terrible precedent to set for the younger people. It's like, yes, just pretend that everything's okay, even though things are going quite miserably. And like to suggest like that like you say, with healthcare, of course, I mean, I'm a compassionate person. I would love to be able to help people out if I could, but I have no choice, because when government takes that responsibility from me, from me entirely, and places that in the hands of some bureaucrat, then I don't no longer have the autonomy or the ability to say, look, I'm taking pride in what I've done for someone. I do that. Why? Because they've taken that away from me. Right? And how do I know, even because it's so centralized? So how do I even know that the proceeds that's taken from me, confiscated from me against my will, how do I know that it's even going to do what it's supposed to be, or what the intention is, when we know a lot of the times, a lot of this money, like for this socialized healthcare system, well, I mean, this COVID outbreak basically showed us with pretty good clarity that a lot of it goes to administration, bureaucracy, and a very small portion of it actually goes to the people who are not just on the front lines, but to incentivize these facilities to be properly, structured so that they can handle these things. That's the whole point. The whole point of a socialized healthcare system, what we've been told, is to protect everyone. It's to fill those little cracks and those voids so nobody slips through them, right? But as we've seen, not the case. A lot of the people that died from COVID-19 are in these long-term care facilities, which are a lot of them are government run, or even the ones that are private, because people are now trying to suggest, these private. If you don't think that these private institutions don't have to go by the letter of the law in terms of how government regulates them, like, you're just kidding yourself. It's not like they're private and they just get to do whatever the hell they want. They're actually basically quasi entities of government anyways, just they have the pretense of autonomy. But to me, it showed the breakdown. Why I told this with another person. I went to the hospital in Fredericton, and Fredericton's the capital of New Brunswick. So, it's the big government town. It should be, at the very least, it should be the place that has, up-to-date modern facilities with lots of modern infrastructure. They still have the old crank up, the things that when you roll to your bed, the food trays.
Oh, yeah.
There's hallway medicine, like people all lined up in the hallways, which is very, not only unprofessional, but even for the people that are placing these things, it just seems to be quite detrimental. And the reason why they even said a lot of these medical people in the medical field told us that we have to lock down, it wasn't, as we're learning more and more now, it wasn't necessarily that the outbreak was going to be so detrimental or so rampant that so many people are dying. It's the fact that they knew, they even had the foreknowledge that actually our healthcare systems was not prepared in any way, shape, or form to deal with this situation, which tells you that all that stuff where you've been told, we just need to take this from your paycheck to make sure that these people, don't fall through the cracks. Well, look at, how many people now have died because they can't get elective surgery done? How many people are going through like serious mental health issues and there's no facilities to properly take care of them? So to me, it's this constant pretense of putting on a smile and a fake facade, but the underlying reality is no longer even close to reflecting what you're pretending. And to me, that's like, you can keep playing that game as long as you want, but you're never going to change the underlying fundamentals. The only way to change the underlying fundamentals is to look back, see that ugly mess, and say, okay, we got to do something about it, right?
Yeah, and this is why the analogy of like the US is having a mental health crisis makes a lot of sense, because Canada needs one, right? But people aren't willing or able to actually think through these issues. No, and that's why it's a religion. It's public healthcare is good. What do you mean private might be better? No, public healthcare is good. It doesn't matter if it's really failing. Public healthcare is good, right? Yeah. And so it's just indoctrinated into young people that this is good. Don't look at it. Don't look at it. Don't look behind, what is it? Behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz? No, just trust, have faith that public healthcare is the best. And we don't have to look into alternatives. One thing I really want to add as well is about like the fundamental like kind of bridge between the personal and the public is values, right? And so it's like, I don't know much about Kelly Leach and that whole thing when she was running, but the whole notion that there are no Canadian values is what you're saying. Oh, Canadians are nice. And so we're saying there's no Canadian values. And that's largely because individuals don't have values, right? They don't know what they value in Canada. And it's like, well, what do we stand for? If we don't have values, then everything goes. And everyone knows in subjectivism there are some limits until they pass those limits, right? And so, but it's really frustrating. And the reason we can't have values, we can't allow ourselves to have values, is because we'd be consistently corrupting them, right? If we had values and we actually said, okay, no, it's not about public healthcare. It's about, we want to make sure old people are well taken care of. That's a principle that you can show actually applies in a private system and could and will be better suited to a private system. And so as soon as you have let's call it more concretized principles of this is what we stand for, it opens up the ability to have other reasons or other means of accomplishing those values. Whereas here, that's not the point. The point is just do what you're told.
Yeah.
And we have literal concretes that are good. Public healthcare is good because we've told you it's good. And it's, again, it brings it very much back to what are the commandments of religion and what are the commandments of the state. Public healthcare is good. Public roads are good. Public schools are good. It's not for what end? Why are they good? What are we actually trying to accomplish? A value is something you act to gain and or keep. And we don't have values in Canada, right? So it's not about, well, why do we have public school? What is the goal? And does it actually achieve that goal? No, we're not allowed to think that way. Public school is good, right? And so it's very much just the indoctrination of means, no matter what the ends are. Whereas if we actually taught people to think about the ends, and so the whole there's no Canadian values thing is really sad, right? Oh, our country doesn't stand for anything, yet I'm still proud. I'm proud for a country that stands for nothing because they have some stuff I'm told are good.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, once again, when you're talking about this, especially the socialized healthcare or any kind of socialist type of endeavor, the part that always kind of speaks to me when they're talking about this rhetoric and they can't allow for this, can't allow for private health. It's like you're touting the supremacy of your socialized system, but you're unwilling, because think about it, how would a private healthcare system come to flourish? Well, if it's going to be private, first of all, you're not going to be looking for government to use any forced wealth redistribution. So, you can still have your socialized healthcare system, right? Not like we could be able to unwind that anytime. All a person say, or let's say a millennial that's got a great idea to come up with some kind of private type of practice that's coming out of these health institutions or these education centers today, come up with some great ideas, but basically what they're being told by their superiors or the people in that are supposedly in these positions of knowledge or the healthcare field saying, no, this is the only way that it works. And even though you come up with a great idea, I'm not even going to allow you to test your hypothesis, because really that's the thing. It's like, how would you ever know? They constantly say all the private healthcare would just be detrimental and people wouldn't be able to afford it. They'd starve. Well, what better way to prove your point? If you believe that the socialized healthcare system would just destroy any kind of private entrepreneur or startup or development, then you allow that to take place. And then you've got actual real world example that you could point to and say, see, it doesn't work. But the reason why they'll never allow that to take place is because then the facade is completely destroyed, because you'll see that actually people who are entrepreneurs, because they have the proper incentive, right? An entrepreneur has the proper incentive because the only way their business model will work is if it proves to be actually successful, not because they can force it. Of course, you can make something successful. If I can eliminate the competition, and I'm the only guy in town that sells milk, there's a pretty good chance that I'll be able to get some money and make some dollars selling milk. But I can't claim superiority if someone else is allowed to produce milk. I can't say that I'm always and forever going to have the best milk, because someone's probably going to come up with a better kind of milk or a better tasting milk, something that lasts long. So to me, for the young people in today, once again, it goes back to the competition. And like I say, it's a healthy competition, not the kind of cutthroat. That's the thing with the people on the left. They kind of talk about competition in such a negative way, right? Which really pissed me off, because it's not. Like I say, competition is constantly raised. Just to me, think about it. What does competition do? Have you ever seen competition make people worse? Like, it just doesn't work, right? It's constantly, competition means that you're constantly trying to raise and elevate, right? So to me, if you give competition a chance, then you would see with clear examples that yes, you could have private institutions. And I think actually we're probably in Canada, whether we want to. Well, I know you and I would be accepting that, but even the ones that don't want private healthcare to ever come to fruition after COVID, I think there might be some little bit of a push where we at least might want to dip our toes in the water. And I hate to talk with the collective term with the we, because I don't tell you the truth. You and I agree that, but the rest of Canadians who are all promoters of social, at least they've been given an example where, okay, see, it doesn't work exactly how you've been told. So maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea to try, or at least allow for an alternative to come to light and see just how that would pan out. Hopefully, anyways.
Yeah, I think I hope some good comes out of it. At least, what COVID will show is how inept the state is in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
And how it doesn't solve all of the problems, and it can't solve all of the problems, and how willing it is to overstep and lock people in their houses. I mean, not literally lock them in, but basically fine them if they leave their houses and things like that. And I think again, competition, the nature of competition is also not understood, because there's this idea of either I sacrifice you to me or I sacrifice myself to you, right? So the notion is, if I'm not sacrificing myself, I must be collecting sacrifices. And they have they don't have an idea of a rational self-interest where I'm just pursuing my own good and irrespective of anyone else, right? And I don't need to exploit. I don't need to run people into the ground and these sorts of things. The one thing that is kind of a shining light in my view is the tech, the tech entrepreneurship has kind of blasted through, right? Silicon Valley, people look up to tech entrepreneurs in large part, and it's because it's been so innovative so quickly. The state hasn't been able to figure out how to regulate. It's like this exponential growth has been really impressive, and it's blasted through, and we see how good we can have it in certain realms when competition is allowed to flourish. And so I hope those lessons expand, and as tech kind of gets out of its own tech bubble and starts medical tech and law tech and other, it starts to expand, which hopefully will happen in the next 10, 20 years. We'll see, it'll be inevitable that tech can break through, because it's so hard to regulate. It's so dynamic. It moves so quickly. The government just can't keep up, right? No. They literally can't keep up. And so hopefully we'll start understanding fundamentally why Silicon Valley is so impressive, why we have all of these great things, this ability to call. We're not on Zoom, but that's just the term now. It's like Google. But
anyways, David, listen, just real quick, just because I know that you are soon going to have to get ready to go, because I think probably about an hour and a half is probably about the maxed out you think or so. So I just before we tie things up, and like I said, I didn't want to cut you off mid thought there, but there was one more aspect of this I'd like to cover so that you get time so you can go about doing what you got to do. But it was the education part of this too, because that's another thing that's so you kind of alluded to it earlier, but we kind of got sidetracked and moved on because, well, you're like me, just fluid thought, kind of go with the conversation, right? But education, and that to me is even more important and actually much more simplistic in terms of how you can reinvent the way of educating is healthcare. There's a little bit more to it. You definitely need a whole lot in terms of bricks and mortar infrastructure and all these things currently, right? That can change over time. But education, the things that have been driving me crazy, especially at least since the last 10 years or so, since social media has exploded and the internet is so dominant in all of our lives, it's been driving me nuts for so long. It's you got so many young people like yourself that have gone to school, and my oldest son took a 2-year business degree, and I think it was $26,000 or whatever. But to think that all the money that these young people today are having to spend, and I mean, just because the state has such control over education, I mean, just outstripped anything that would be actually market derived prices in terms of education. We live in the age of information where you literally have access to the most knowledgeable minds on the planet, with just basically the cost of your broadband internet connection, right? And maybe whatever they would charge for their courses, which would obviously be much cheaper because you can reproduce it to billions of people. That's the crazy thing. And the fact that we're still functioning off an education system that basically was adopted from old world Europe, the Prussian model of the 1840s that Egerton Ryerson brought to really though? This is one of the most, and maybe someday we can actually dig down deep into this actually, because I love to discuss the education system, but I just kind of want to touch on it a little bit today is how crazy is it that we live in the age of information and we have to even have these kind of ridiculous conversation, debates, or discussions in regard to how you could get a better education without having to be subject to these indoctrination centers that you're forced into where it's a one size fits all approach.
Oh, it's absolutely absurd. Education is the most important issue for all of these things because we're teaching kids to be brainwashed, right? We're teaching kids to not use their minds, and we're teaching kids to not even think their minds can be used, right? So that's the thing. When I say, no, we can have an education model, we can have an ecosystem where each person can think for themselves, I get told, no, that's not possible, right? And people don't have faith in the human mind, in the human capability for reason. And so it's really absurd. And I think that's another thing that will be interesting to discover after COVID, especially in the universities, right? Like, why would I pay $10,000 when I'm just sitting behind my computer? Like, the facade of why I need to go to these universities is going to break. But also, I think the public school system as well. Like, again, it comes down to, if people don't feel they're responsible, they don't need to wake up. And so if I'm a parent and I'm already forced to pay taxes and forced to pay for schools, am I really, even if I can afford it, am I really, and some parents do, right? But am I really going to think about what else to do? Like, my kid's education is taken care of, right? It's just, I don't have to think about it. And so I think, like, again, the most important thing is the parents and the personal responsibility, because there are some alternatives, but the whole thing is, but your money's stolen from you, so you may as well just go to that school. But I mean, I hated public education, right? Like, I don't know any. It's really, it just focuses you. It forces you to be an equal, right? Like, stamp down intelligence. No, we're going this pace, like, and. Yeah, so it's devastating. It's terrible for kids. And it's also not, it's the same thing of, it's not designed to uphold the best. And because there's something wrong with us saying, no, this is the smartest kid and we should be happy and you should want to be smarter as well. Like, let's work all to be better. And so I think it's definitely worth, like, a long conversation about the educational system generally. And I mean, that's the thing that, when people say, oh, robots or AI is going to take all of our jobs, the thing I say the most is that we could improve education. There's no reason we can't have class sizes of 5, right? If we want to hire people, I'd rather learn from a person than a computer personally, right? But you can also have, like, more private tutoring, whether on Skype or in person. And education, bringing in healthcare again, I think education and, like, a broad view of healthcare, massage, physiotherapy, like, these are two fields that are completely underserved. And we'd all live such a better life if there was an influx of practitioners. But the massive fields are so regulated that we can't have a more dynamic model. It's, oh no, class sizes of 25 are good. That's what's good. And so, the worst part is the teachers have these mindsets as well. And there's this self-selection bias. Who wants to, like, if I say to a teacher, I think that school should be private, they think I'm, like, attacking their very person, right? Yeah. But no, teaching's extremely important. I value it so much. I want it to be private, right? But that's not, they can't even think of it that way, which is upsetting.
Well, exactly. And I would say, because I've even mentioned this before too, most of my school education, I dropped out in grade 9. I went back, got a GED much later in life. But in regular school, and even when I went back to do my GED, over the course of my education, I might have had 4 teachers that were exceptional and helped me tremendously develop some knowledge, especially in terms of essays. I had an English teacher when I was taking my GED, and the first essay I did, it was just terrible, but she challenged me. She showed me where I messed up, and man, did I ever hold myself. In the next one, I got like 98%. I put my nose to the grindstone, and I just, and she did that for me, just like I had a math teacher. And like I say, and in a private setting, those people, like, to me, the way I would explain that to a teacher that would take offense, like, I think you should be much more rewarded and not placed in this situation where you're basically having to do the same thing as everyone else. I think you're a unique teacher. I think you actually have a higher capacity and more competence in your field. And I think that you could be properly rewarded, because if you're properly rewarded for it, then I think a lot of other people will be properly rewarded too. And rather than you just have to teach 25 people, I'd like for you to be able to put your courses online and educate, 250,000 people instead, right? Because I think a lot of these people would benefit from what you have to offer, rather than some of the teachers that are just showing up. Because we know there are discrepancies, there are variances in the kind of people that go into these positions in terms of their competence and how ambitious they are in terms of what they want to teach their people. Or their pupils. So to me, it's like allowing a little bit of competition to take place would actually be rewarding for the people who are most competent. I say that same thing in the health field. In my family, I've got doctors, I've got many nurses. And you know what? I think a lot of them would benefit tremendously. And I think they could benefit society if they were not stuck in this one size fits all, where everybody's treated basically the same way, paid basically the same kind of compensation, no matter how, because that's the other thing is work ethic, right? You can get paid the same thing, but one person might have tremendous amount more work ethic or can get more done in like an 8-hour shift than someone else can. So to me, that's the beauty, is because I respect and I perceive every human being on this planet as individuals. I don't want a one size fits all approach. Right. I think that's quite detrimental. I think I'm the one that's more compassionate, just like Ayn Rand said, is I'm more compassionate to the minorities because the individual is the ultimate minority, right? And to me, it's like I want every individual on this planet to have their own autonomy and their sovereignty, to be respected and admired for what they bring to the table, not because they're part of a collective, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think one thing I'll say, I'm jealous that you had 4 good teachers, because like the best teacher I had was just the one who let me not do work I didn't want to do, whereas everyone else would, like, it would be a consistent fight. And then in university, I only had a few professors that I respected, and they were the ones who, like, basically the one I respected the most told me, if you don't do this, I will fail you, just straight up. Because the other thing, it goes back to the competition. Universities, it's all padded cells now, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, everyone, you can't fail anyone. There's like, everyone's a little flower. They'll have a mental health breakdown if they're not successful. And I mean, Waterloo got flack because it is like a competitive program, and they actually, like, they used to email you your rank so you know how well you're doing. And it was seen as, no, you can't have competition in university. That's terrible. And that's the other, bringing it back to millennials, that's the other huge problem now, is that you have 66% of Canadian millennials went to university because they were told they should go to university. And they don't want to face the fact that myself and many other friends have, that it was a freaking waste, right? Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I got the degree that I have no interest in pursuing. So many people are like that. But to actually admit that to yourself, then, you know, you question your very career path, and you question a lot of your past. So, you know, now we're just free university for everyone because I had to do it, and I had to do it. I had to, quote unquote, do it and pay for it myself. That doesn't make sense. And like, I remember I had a panel discussion about this, and we were like, oh no, but if society expects us to go to university, society should pay for it. And it's as if, like, what is this society, right? What is this group that's telling us we have to do it? And so the education problem, in my view, is getting slightly worse, actually, but I hope we can turn it around. But again, it's the millennials are very much bought into the implicit, or what is it, the intrinsic good of university, because that's what they were told growing up.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to, and I'll tie this up, and I really appreciate you coming on, having this chat with me today, David. But it comes down to, and I'm going to butcher the paraphrase, I guess, but it's a quote I remember. It was a meme that was passed around years ago. Is basically, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's probably not going to work out too well, right? But what it is because of we're so individualistic, and we're very unique human beings, right? In some ways, of course, we share some similarities and stuff, but because each individual is unique, is a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of classroom settings, like you've experienced, I've experienced, and many millennials for sure are experiencing today, or I guess probably a lot of them now actually have already graduated. Now you're into the Gen Zers, though, is you'll have a substantial portion of those people sitting in those classrooms being taught all the same way, when they could be benefiting tremendously in a different type of environment, or maybe with more hands-on experience, or because that's the thing, we all have not just unique characteristics, but unique goals and aspirations as well. So I think, tailoring people's educations individually, once again, is to respect the individual rather than just treating them like robots or the Borg, right? Like, where we're all just hooked up to a collective. And the collective mindset anyways, or just like you were saying, society is such an abstract that literally seeks to deny the individual. To me, it's like talk about the forest without ever recognizing there's a tree in there, right? It's like, okay, but you got to recognize that there's things that are unique about. There's maple trees, there's pines, but to me, that's the beautiful thing about, and I think what I love about objectivism, libertarianism, and the Western experiment, in particular the US, is the unique characteristics of what it is to be an autonomous, free individual human being. And I think that's what millennials got to get back to at the end of the day, and not just back to, because I don't like to talk things in terms of going backwards, but hopefully take some of that knowledge of the past, kind of like what we were talking about, the foundation when we were starting out this stream, take that foundation that has been built upon and hopefully improve that gradually over time. And that's what will advance humanity forward and bring us to full maturity at some point in time. And like I say, I think we're in a pretty good position today. I know you're a little bit positive and negative on that, but I have high hopes, and not just for millennials, but even the next successive generation as well.
Yeah, I'm an optimist overall, so I agree.
Right on. Well, like I say, thank you very much again, Dave, for having this conversation. And if you ever want to again, like I say, have a talk about education, but I don't want to muscle in on Tim's, because actually I think, and I will mention to the folks here in the stream too, that definitely check out, and I placed a link to it in the description of the stream already, but definitely check out Tim and David's channel that they put up. What is it? Every week, I believe, right, David? Is
twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays.
Okay. So, and like I say, they've done great. They cover individual topics each upload that they do, and it's very well done. They usually keep it underneath an hour, a lot of times 30, 40, 50 minutes or so. So it's, to me, I think it's just about the right amount of time, and you guys really hammer down and talk about very thorough and in-depth in terms of these concepts and these topics and these issues. And I personally, I think I might have missed one or two ever, and I might go back and check the ones that I haven't, but I really appreciate what you guys bring to the table. And I'm hoping more and more people will start pivoting towards watching your channel and getting up to speed and knowledgeable in terms of not just objectivism, but libertarianism, and the fact that you two are once again fellow Canadians that lead by example, and I think are great principled individuals that definitely support individual liberty that is so important for the younger people to recognize today. So thanks again, David.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'd be happy to come on this show again sometime soon.
All right, buddy. Well, you have fun, whatever you're going to do there later on today. And we'll see you in the next time, or the next time we have a chat. All right.
Thanks. See ya.
Yeah. Take it easy. Okay, folks. So I'm just going to be, like I say, I actually, if I will, I probably should check a couple of the comments before I tie it up. But like I say, I really appreciate you folks showing up for this stream, because this was a very important topic. Especially, like I say, as a father of two millennials myself, I thought it was really, really important to talk about what individual liberty, objectivism, libertarianism, and all these concepts that I think are quite new and fresh in the minds of a lot of the younger people today. But hopefully they'll want to delve down into it. And like I say, if you have millennial age sons or daughters or maybe grandchildren yourself, maybe share this video with them, and hopefully they'll get a chance to watch and listen to a couple guys talk about things that I think might appeal to them, and maybe offer at least a counter perspective than what they typically hear from those who are constantly promoting the state or big government as a means to an end, or the guide, or the moral, I don't know, superior aspect of what it is to be a Canadian. That, to me, I think that's all false premises that are built and founded upon some really, really old knowledge that actually is not just provably incorrect and false, but based on nothing but abstract mysticism. Today, I think the most important thing we can do in the information age is get the younger people, and even some of the older people, but in particular because the young people are the future, to get them up to speed, figuring out and understanding some of these concepts in terms of what it is to be a free human being today, and to look for a place to gain some form of morality and ethics without having to subject yourself to mysticism or blind altruism. Anyways, like I say, I'll check and see just real quick if there's a few people left in the chat that maybe had a couple questions, because I don't want to go on too long. I wanted to tie this up. Actually, you know what? No, I'll save it for our next stream, tell you the truth, folks, because it's about an hour and a half now. And I think people would be happy just to have it at that length. And I'll deal with the comments and talk with you folks at the next stream. So thanks for everyone that did show up today. I really appreciate it. I know it was a little bit earlier than typical. But even if you didn't get the time to see it all today, like I say, check it out later on. You can always watch it and go back to it. Watch a half of it, put it on the back burner and go back to it later after that fact, because you can always, start off where you left, or start back where you left off. But like I say, definitely give other people the option to see this by sharing it with them. And I really appreciate you for doing so. So everyone have yourself a great, this is a long weekend. So have a great long weekend. Watch for my video. I'll have actually standalone video coming up tomorrow. It's in regards, it's that one that I was telling you I was going to make regarding the YouTube CEO. That'll be released tomorrow morning, I believe, 10 o'clock Eastern time. And once again, give that a look and share that with others as well. And that'd be greatly appreciated. Like I say, everyone have a great day. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.